out, play video games all day.
Yeah, no, actually I slept. I just legitimately slept for 5 hours in the middle of the day.
Well, please don't get me sick. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the plan.
I'm a little worried that I'm going to get COVID from Comic-Con, but we'll see.
So, as a reminder, that ribbon mic is probably going to be on unless you turn it off.
Okay. So I won't talk.
Yeah, see, yep, thank you. All right, I got the thumbs up. I guess that means we're ready to go. You all seem ready to go. All right, let's go ahead and turn this mic off, though. That's the one that's going to be black wireless. There you go. I think that'll work out better. Good morning, class. How's everybody doing today? Fantastic. I'd be doing a little better if I remember where I stranded my coffee, but such is life. Would you believe we're studying the book of Daniel today? Did you see that coming? All right, let's go ahead and dive in. I'll try and make my review portion as brief as I can, briefer than usual, maybe if I can. So, the book of Daniel is a book that takes place during the captivity of Israel. Israel is no longer a thriving, flourishing kingdom as it once was under David and especially under Solomon. It's a fractured kingdom that, through a series of repeated idolatries, let's say, God in his frustration finally said, you know what? You did not keep the covenant. You will not keep the land promised to you in the covenant. So the invading armies, in this case the Babylonians, came in, defeated them, pushed them into exile. Darling, would you mind getting me a cup of coffee? Thank you so much. She's way more valuable than the person who gets the coffee, but it's good. Was that? No, black man, all the way. Anyway, so this is a time in which Babylon came in, captured the people of Israel, pulled them off in exile, so they're no longer in the promised land. Nebuchadnezzar raided, as he would have done with every other nation he conquered, he raided valuables from them. In this case, we know for sure that he took some of the holy vessels, like cups and ladles and that kind of stuff, all the stuff that was gold-plated and really made nice for the temple. He took that stuff away with him. And that'll be relevance in our story today. The book of Daniel follows, for the first 4 chapters, Nebuchadnezzar. And if you're Googling this up, if you want to know who we're talking about, thank you so much. You look beautiful, by the way. I just want that to be recorded for posterity. Don, if you got me the coffee, I would not have told you you look beautiful. I just want to be clear about that. So if you're looking for who this historical figure is, this is probably Nebuchadnezzar II, Nebuchadnezzar II, also known as Nebuchadnezzar the Great or the Builder. He sort of represents the height of the Babylonian Empire. And so during this time, he is recruiting the best and brightest from all the conquered peoples. And in the case of Israel and Judah, that means Daniel and I can do this. Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. Carol gave me a passing grade. How about that? So these men get recruited into this program to cultivate a cabinet of multicultural advisors, maybe to try and get the best of all the conquered peoples integrated into his empire. And during this time, Nebuchadnezzar has a disturbing dream. We read about that. Daniel is the only one who can interpret the dream. By the way, Nebuchadnezzar has a weird challenge, right? Because he's got a whole cabinet full of enchanters and diviners and Chaldeans and all that kind of stuff, right? He's got this whole cabinet of these people. Any of them could claim to be able to do it, right? But he wants to know that the interpretation he gets is true, authentic, divine, because he believes he's having a divine message. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I want you to interpret the dream for me, but first you have to tell me what I dreamed. You have to tell me what I dreamed. And of course, nobody can do that. Let me take a step back this way and maybe I'll feedback less. Nobody seems to be able to do that. And so he's like, well, you're all worthless. Let's just kill you guys and move on with life. And so when the guards come to kill Daniel and his friends, Daniel says, maybe let's not. Maybe let's pause on that for a minute. I haven't had a shot. Why don't you go tell Nebuchadnezzar that at the moment he's ready, he can call me in. I'll tell him his dream. I'll tell him the interpretation. And the guard says, okay. So he goes back to Nebuchadnezzar and does that thing. Meanwhile, what does Daniel do? You know? He turns around to his buddies and says, guys, we got to pray. We got to pray now. All right. So this implies that God hadn't given him any sort of divine revelation that he could do this. And maybe even, I doubt he has a history of doing this, but he in faith believes that God wants him to do this. And so he asks God. And so he gets called before Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, well, here's the deal. If you can tell me my dream and its interpretation, then I will give you high honor. If not, Queen of Hearts, off with your head, right? And Daniel says, what you're asking is impossible, right? There's nobody who can do what you're asking me to do. Certainly I can't. But the God who I serve, he can do anything. And he has told me what you dreamed, and he has given me its interpretation. So he tells him about it, the statue, gold head, silver, bronze, iron, and eventually clay mixed with iron, right, as you descend. And those represent the four kingdoms, the Babylonians, with Nebuchadnezzar being the golden head, right? And then there's this great boulder that rolls down from a mountain, and it's uncut by human hands, right? So there's no human origin to this thing. It is the operation of the divine. That rock rolls down the mountain, and it comes and it smites. I like using that word. You don't get to use that word much. It smites the statue, and the feet break, the statue falls, but the stone that rolled down the hill stands forever and is established as an eternal kingdom. The four sections of the statue, including the iron that then gets diluted with clay, represent four coming kingdoms. This will happen in world history. This is a prophecy that's going to happen, right? With the Babylonians at the top, the first ones. After them, the Medo-Persians. After that, you have the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, and so forth. And then after that, you get the iron, which is, of course, Rome. And then Rome will be fractured forever. And the picture here kind of is that it's actually Jesus, because he is the stone, not cleft by human hands, right? Born of a virgin, the whole thing. He is the stone that rolls down and topples all the human kingdoms and establishes a kingdom that will last forever. So Nebuchadnezzar has a messianic vision, which is wild. And the point of the whole thing is to humble him and to let him know that God has put him in his place and he ought to live accordingly. Well, he doesn't get that. So in the next chapter, he makes a statue. No clay feet. The whole thing is solid gold plating, right? And it's a statue to himself. And he invites everybody to come and be there at the ribbon cutting ceremony. And that all the VIPs. And that includes Daniel and his three friends. And they don't bow down when they have to bow down, so they're supposed to get thrown in the fire furnace. You all know how this goes. Nebuchadnezzar sees four men walking in the fire, and it's not clear if anybody else does. I'm bringing this up. I don't find this in it. I read commentaries ahead of these Bible studies, and I don't find people commenting on this. So this is just my reading of it. But maybe you read the same thing. We've got a few hundred years of experts reading this stuff and they don't see it. Maybe there's nothing to it. So just take it with a grain of salt. But I do think it's going to help explain some stuff in this chapter. Nebuchadnezzar sees it and he calls them out of the fire. They come out unscathed. He learns that their God is the God who can spare you from the flames. So his respect for the Hebrew God is growing, right? And he passes a law saying that nobody can trash talk, basically, nobody can trash talk the God of the Hebrews, right? So their right to practice religion is protected. That's a better deal than they had under Pharaoh, by the way. Last chapter, we had this bizarre story of Nebuchadnezzar having another dream. He has a dream. Y'all remember what's in the dream? A giant tree. A tree that stretches up so that its top scrapes the bottom of heaven. Its branches stretch out broad and wide. Its leaves are beautiful. It's full of fruit. It's abundant. All the birds of the air can make nests in its limbs. All the beasts of the field can find shelter under its shade. And everybody is fed from this tree. It's a picture of plenty. It's nearly a picture of paradise, right? And the interpretation here is that Nebuchadnezzar, you are that tree. Well, that's nice. Yeah, except the next thing that happens in the dream is the tree gets cut down. And it gets wrapped with a band of bronze and a band of iron. Do I have that right? I believe that's right. Because it forgot its purpose, right? The purpose of that tree was to provide for and care for the world. But Nebuchadnezzar has become obsessed with himself. He thinks that all he has and his station in life is a testament to himself for the benefit of himself. Benefit by the Nebuchadnezzar, a government by the Nebuchadnezzar for the Nebuchadnezzar, right? To which God is saying, no. You are supposed to be a servant. And because you have forgotten this, because you're so full of pride, because you have not understood what I've been trying to tell you all this time, I'm going to strip you of your dignity. So Nebuchadnezzar was driven out into the wilderness where he ate grass like a cow. And he slept in the pasture and was covered with the dew in the morning. And his fingernails grew out like eagle's talons, and his hair like eagle's feathers. He's a wild man, and he's lost his wits. And this isn't a metaphor. This happens to him. And he's out there for 7 periods of time. 7 months, maybe. 7 years, maybe. I don't think anything less than months makes sense, because how long does it take to grow your hair and nails and stuff, But he's out there for some time, some 7 periods of time. And while he's out there, he has that moment that we read about in the parable of the prodigal son. The prodigal son, when he hits rock bottom, he's sitting there and he's so hungry he wishes he could eat the pig's food. And that's when he goes, well, you know what? Things were better as a son than as my own man. Nebuchadnezzar has a similar revelation, right? He's out there in the field and he turns his eyes to heaven and says, oh, this is what I was told about. This is what I was warned about. And he repents. And just as that happens, advisors from the capital have come out into the field and they take him home. Now, were these guys like just keeping an eye on him regularly? So this was like their regular checkup? Maybe. Was it coincidental? Maybe. Did God send them? Maybe. Don't know. But however it happened, he was brought back in and the kingdom was restored to him. And he wraps all this up with saying, and so now I know that the Lord is the Most High. Right? Let me give you the exact. I don't want to paraphrase this, because this is where we left off. He says, this is chapter 4, verse 34. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I was blessed. And I blessed the Most High. I blessed the Most High, and praised him and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. See, he understands it now, right? He gets that his majesty and splendor are not for him. They're for the kingdom. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. All right. So, are we going to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven? I don't know. It would be cool. That'd be cool. Will he? I don't know. Is he ever brought into, the covenant of salvation? Does he have faith in God? Does he have saving faith? I don't know. There is an appropriate point that all mankind, regardless of their relationship to God, ought to, in humility, respect God. You know what I mean? This is the effect that awe ought to have on somebody. When you go out to the ocean and you're overwhelmed by its vastness, when you look up at the starry sky and you're overwhelmed by it, and you realize just how small you are, when you stand on a mountaintop and you look out and you see just how big it all is, and that bigness is very small in comparison to the whole universe, the proper response ought to be humility, right? And a humility grounded in a reverence for the one who made it all. Everybody should have that. Is everybody who has that saved? Well, no, I can't say that, right? There are a lot of people who just don't have that anyways. That's sad, I think. But I don't know what the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and salvation is. None of y'all asked, so I guess that's okay. But this kind of wraps up the story of God and Nebuchadnezzar. And that's a more consistent theme in the first 4 chapters than God and Daniel or God and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? So I find that fascinating. Does this stuff inform our view of how to live in a world with a secular society, in a country where we don't have an established state religion? I think it does. I think a lot of this informs us how we ought to live as just members of society who are Christian, who are not necessarily trying to impose Christianity on everybody, certainly not by force. But we do live in humble obedience to God, serving well. Well, the story of Nebuchadnezzar wraps up there, so I want to move on to the next story, which is chapter 5. And this just got really loud in my ear. So, last chapter was a first-person account from Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 5, we're going to go back to third person, okay? So it says, King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. King Belshazzar? Who's King Belshazzar? So there's a little bit of a time jump here. I'm going to try and reconcile what you're reading here with the history that we have from third-party evidences. We will hear, excuse me, we will hear in this chapter Nebuchadnezzar being referred to as Belshazzar's father. I don't think it's proper to think about that in the technical one generation direct descendant kind of way. I think it'd be better to think of it both in the idea of a forefather, but also more in the sense of the lineage of the kingdom. Okay? So let's use the word father a little bit more loosely than that. I don't think we're doing any violence to the text to do so. I don't think there's any claims that Nebuchadnezzar took a wife and the two of them made Belshazzar. It wouldn't work like that. But I do want to give you a brief history of what we know. So, Nebuchadnezzar, emperor basically of the world, reigned for, I think it was somewhere close to 40 years. It's a good run. Especially if there's a bout of madness in the middle and nobody seemed to depose you. It's pretty good. But then after that, after he dies, he is succeeded by his son. I'm going to give you the names. These will not be on the final exam. Take notes if you will. He is succeeded by Amel-Marduk. And then, so that's in 562. In 560, so 2 years later, he is murdered by Neriglissar. These are fun names, by the way. That's his brother-in-law, right? So his brother-in-law murders him, and he takes the throne. He is on the throne for 6 years. And then he is succeeded by Labashi-Marduk, who is young and wicked. Within just a few months of taking the throne, he is betrayed and deposed by Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar. So these guys arranged a coup, and then they just kind of co-led. If you ever, there are, like the office of a lawyer might be like, Kaplan, Smith and Associates or whatever, right? It's that kind of situation where they're like partners, they're co-regents. So who we're reading about right now is that Belshazzar. So we've had 1, 2, 3 coups in under 10 years. One of them was just a few months after being in office. So it's been a wild ride. Not great. It is pretty clear to me that the lessons learned by Nebuchadnezzar were not learned by his successors. Okay? So we have this Belshazzar. Something worth noting, in every case, Amel-Marduk, Labashi-Marduk, Neriglissar, all these men, just like Nebuchadnezzar and just like the names he tried to give, Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they all are references to these pagan gods, right? Marduk was one of these pagan gods, right? So you can see there's no transformation of identity into people who are followers of this Hebrew God. All right, so all that happened. King Belshazzar is co-regent. He's on the throne. He's throwing a big party, big blow-up party. He's got 1,000 lords. And, there's two things worth noting in that. Number one, this is an excessive party, right? He's furnishing wine for 1,000 people, presumably to get really drunk. So that's pretty excessive. This is a far cry from the lesson Nebuchadnezzar was supposed to learn, wherein he is a servant to the world, right? That was the message of the tree. So this picture stands in direct opposition to that. And the author is making it clear to us. Yeah, that repentance that we saw maybe in Nebuchadnezzar, it didn't stick, okay? So we have this party for 1,000 guys. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, that's the thing I was talking about earlier, his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank them. They drank and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. All right. Let's pause on this for a moment. So Nebuchadnezzar had raided the temple. We know this. He has the vessels. It seems like maybe they were left in a storehouse or something. So it's bad, right, that he raided the temple, but it had been handed over to him. Remind me, chapter 1, what was the controversy that Shadrach, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah stirred up? What was the controversy from chapter 1? They're in the dorms, they're going to the mess hall. Right, they would not eat the meat and they would not drink the wine, and we think that's probably because the meat and the wine would have been sacrificed to idols. This is probably the same. So when you hear about Belshazzar using the cups from the temple and filling them with wine sacrificed to idols, this is, it's a big no-no. Thank you, Ray. That's exactly the wording I was looking for. Yeah, it's a shocking, it's a flagrant idolatry. And, there is probably some level at which Belshazzar is doing this because they're nice cups. But there's probably another level at which he's doing this to sort of flaunt the domination of his people and his gods over the other peoples and their gods. So it's not going to be purely random what happens next. One more thing I want to point out. They praise the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Two things to note about that. Number one, those people in the Bible sometimes like to make lists, and that's fine. But part of what's going on there is those are all materials that get worked by human hands, right? And this is a strong theme throughout, especially the Old Testament, but it continues on into the New Testament too, that no God made by human hands is a God, right? If you make the God yourself, it's not really God. Also, and I don't know if there's a direct connection to this or not, but what are the first materials listed here? Gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Same ones in the statue. Now, that might just be because of the way that they get worked, but to me, there's probably some reference here going on, calling the mind of the reader, and maybe these people, if they know their history, back to that first vision, which will be significant in a moment. So while that's going on, they're drinking to all these idols. They're laughing it up, having a good time at the expense of the God of the Hebrews. Verse 5. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. The king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make it known to the king, or make known to the king the interpretation. Then Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. Having read through 5-ish commentaries on this passage, I heard a variety of opinions as to why they couldn't read the enchantment, or the inscription. No problem why they couldn't interpret it, but why can't they read it? So, I'm going to rattle off a few for you. Number one is, perhaps these words are written in Hebrew, which is just a language they don't know. This is probably, I think this is one of the fairly common interpretations. Interpretation number 2, and I read this from 2 different commentaries. It's weird. We don't know why they couldn't read it. Thanks. Helpful insight there. In those commentaries, they suggest that the words are in Chaldee, which Chaldeans should be able to read, one would think, right? Another commentary suggested that the words are Aramaic. Part of the problem is these languages are all really closely related. So, make of that what you will. here's the interpretation I want to offer to you that I did not find in a commentary. And so take it with whatever caution you need. But if you'd reread that passage, who saw the writing? Who saw the hand? Go ahead, reread it. The king. The only one it mentions seeing it is the king. The only one whose face turns pale is the king. Everybody else is like, what's going on? So the story is written in such a way, it says, a hand appeared and wrote on the wall. Well, that could be a general appearance, like everybody maybe could have seen that. Just like with the 4 men in the fire. Maybe everybody saw that, but maybe not. Only Nebuchadnezzar reacted. Only Nebuchadnezzar asked the question. People seem to be puzzled by that. Nebuchadnezzar's first interaction with Daniel was, I had a dream. This is a private revelation to me. I need you to tell me what it was. So the suggestion I'm putting out here is that perhaps only Belshazzar saw it. And only Belshazzar could see it. And when everybody else comes in, they don't see anything because it wasn't for them. And then Daniel gets to do what he's already done 2 other times in this, what he already got to do, 2 other times, because I guess he did this with the second dream too. He gets to say, oh, I know what you saw. God has revealed to me what you saw. I don't want to make too much of this because it is not going to greatly affect the meaning of the text. But to me, this is a sensible reading. If you read it otherwise, I'm interested in your reading and your thoughts as well. But maybe, if there's no objections, we'll proceed with that being the story. Look good? Okay. So, everybody comes in. At least they can't read it. Maybe they can't see it. So that brings us up to, and if you're just reading this book and you don't know the history between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, you might be like, well, there's a guy. Why don't they just go to the go-to guy? But we've been through a few turnovers already, and people who were in Belshazzar's cabinet probably aren't in favor, or in Nebuchadnezzar's cabinet probably aren't in favor anymore. These people probably don't know about Daniel and Hananiah and Azariah. So, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. It's not going to happen. Let not your thoughts alarm you, or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because in excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So, it's clear that because the queen has to explain all this stuff to him, he doesn't know who Daniel is. Let's read a little bit more, and then we'll talk about Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You're that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I've heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not read this writing, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Before we get into Daniel's response, I want to pause on this a little bit because I was earlier talking about how maybe this book informs how we live as Christians in a world that is not necessarily Christian? How do we serve if we find that our government doesn't honor God? Something that you'll notice from Daniel's interactions with Nebuchadnezzar, as well as with his interaction here with Belshazzar, is that he does serve. He doesn't say, like, I don't have to help a pagan like you, you know. He doesn't delight in the trouble that would befall the people who conquered him. I mentioned this parallel a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to bring it out again. He is like the antithesis of Jonah, right? Where Jonah just wants God to drop the hammer on his enemies. Daniel clearly isn't like that. So Belshazzar says, I heard you're a guy who solves problems. Would you solve a problem for me? Then Daniel answered and said to the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. All right, so from the outset, we're going to establish that I'm not doing this for my own personal gain. Moreover, if you look at how he talked to Nebuchadnezzar and how he talked to Belshazzar, it's a lot different. It's a lot different. Remember with Nebuchadnezzar, he's like, I wish this wasn't about you when the bad news comes. With Belshazzar, he's a bit more cold and a little more distant. Right? Nevertheless, I will read, excuse me, I will read to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. And whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. And whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. And he fed on grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. All right, so Daniel's establishing here, before he even gets into the interpretation, he's establishing here, look, you don't really have an excuse, man. God worked hard on Nebuchadnezzar to get through to him, and he got through to him, and you watched the whole thing go down, and you heard what Nebuchadnezzar had to say, and you read his memoirs, and like what are you doing, man? Nebuchadnezzar had an encounter with the almighty, all-powerful God, and here you are worshiping toys, stuff you made with your own hands. This is why I think there's so much emphasis on Nebuchadnezzar being his father and Belshazzar being the son, right? It's not about the genetic lineage so much as, look, you're here for all of this, and you could have learned from him. There has not been a king whose greatness surpassed Nebuchadnezzar, and yet you still don't get it. All right, 24. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Paris, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. This is to me, this is a hard text, right? Because I always want people to have that redemptive turn. But God's covenant was not with Babylon, right? God's covenant was with his people. And nevertheless, God made overture after overture to try and show who he is, and that salvation belongs only to him. But ultimately, and we knew this from chapter 2, this kingdom was going to come to an end, and another would take its place. So you can see, I don't know how much of that insight Daniel was given. Because, again, you see this difference in relationship between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and Belshazzar, right? Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, he's kind with him. He tries to befriend him. He takes the promotion, right? When Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to put you over all the stuff. And he's like, great, also, can you promote my friends as well? With Belshazzar, it's not the same. And I wonder maybe if Daniel knows, well, it's not going to make a difference. You don't get to keep all this. Now, we're going to get to see a rare thing in history and a rare thing in Scripture, which is we just saw the Babylonian Empire fall right there. Just happened. Pretty brief too, you know. Guess what chapter 6 is going to bring? What's that? Well, we're getting there, yeah. But more precisely, the entrance of the Medo-Persian Empire and King Darius. And this is wild, right? Because you imagine that when the conquering army comes in and they kill the king, they're probably wiping out a lot of people. But the story of Daniel is not over. He's going to make it from this kingdom to the next one. And we'll see that next week. I guess we're going to stop there. Yeah. Hopefully you guys, you know what, I don't usually do this, and I probably should make some more space for it. As we were reading, did anything pop out at you? Did you have any questions or thoughts? Any little things you scribbled down? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, so let me say it because I have a microphone. So Cindy asked, the king had a strong reaction to the hand and the writing on the wall, even though he didn't know what it meant. But he had to have some inkling, right? Yeah, so if it's written in Chaldean, he can read it. Maybe he knows, ooh, that doesn't sound good. Maybe. It might just be that he saw a ghost hand right on the wall, and that's going to give you pause, It could be just that the phenomenon itself kind of disturbed him deeply, because it's not like this is a great party trick or something, you know. But those words are ominous, like measured, weighed, divided. Ugh. It doesn't sound like a toast you want to give, right? So I think even if he could read it and have a surface level interpretation, he still doesn't, you know. So he was looking for that divine insight, just like Nebuchadnezzar was. Russell. Yeah, yeah. So what Russell says is, isn't it remarkable that despite the fact that Daniel keeps giving bad news, they don't like kill him or throw him in prison or they, and you know, again, I think at least with the case of Nebuchadnezzar, I think he was really leery of the yes men in his court, right? So when somebody gives him a hard truth, he's like, finally, somebody who'll give it to me straight. With Belshazzar, I think maybe part of the problem is that he publicly, in front of thousands of people, said, well, if somebody can interpret this, I'll make him my number 3. Yeah. 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 But so I think at that point, Belshazzar's backed into a corner. It's like he can't throw this guy in prison because he just said in front of 1,000 people, if you can do this, I'll make you upper brass. And then Daniel does it. It's not favorable. He's like, well, I guess we're doing it. Never mind the fact that Daniel said, I don't really want it. All right, we are at time. We got to get ready for church. So we got church coming up in about 12 minutes. Thanks for being here. We'll pick up again next week with the Persian Empire. Isn't that exciting? So we'll see you then.